Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel on how to transform heating in millions and millions of buildings in the United States alone. I'm Meg Howard. I'm a program director at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and I'll be moderating the panel today. And our panelists are going to talk about their work on this topic from a variety of perspectives. We're all New England based, but different perspectives here. So first we have Shawn Intorcio from a utility perspective. Shawn is an integrated resource planning engineer at Reading Municipal Light Department, where she leads their heat pump work. And then next, after that, we'll hear from Travis Estes, who works at an energy consulting firm that's often dealing with a customer and contractor perspective. Travis is the chief operating officer of Adobe Energy Management. And finally, we'll hear from Dana Fisher, representing the manufacturer perspective. Dana is the East Coast Manager of Utilities and Electrification for Mitsubishi, which at least in Massachusetts, where I am, is currently dominating the heat pump market. I have to say I'm really excited about this panel. I'm certainly a Massachusetts, New England centric perspective, but I think this group is just doing some really great work. So I'm excited to get to hear from each of them and to have them be able to share what they're doing with you all. In terms of logistics, they're each going to give a brief presentation. I'll ask as they're talking if everyone can type their questions in the chat. We'll keep an eye on them and then get to some of those questions at the end as part of the panel discussion. And then afterwards, each of the panelists will be available in a breakout room starting around 5 o'clock. So we're going to hear from Shawn first, but before I turn things over to Shawn, I just wanted to set a little context for what we're talking about here today. I think in our region, across the country, different reports and analyses are increasingly converging on, sort of a least cost, least risk option to get fossil fuels out of buildings, and that looks like electrifying heating with heat pumps, while at the same time making buildings more efficient and switching our electric systems to renewables. So definitely have to walk and chew gum, but on the building side, it looks like heat pumps are going to play a major role. So we know this is the general direction, but how are we going to get there? As I said, I work for the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and even with one state, sort of the scale of this challenge can be pretty daunting for the transformation we need. Our state has committed to net zero by 2050. So we've started to make some 2030 goals. We have 2.6 million households in Massachusetts, and our goal right now is to convert 1 million of those households to electrified heating by 2030, plus another 300 to 400 million square feet of commercial real estate. So if you just do the simple math, if we were kind of on a steady trajectory to do this by 2030, that'd be 100,000 households per year. The Boston Globe just ran an article saying that there are only 461 whole home conversions from fossil fuels to heat pumps in 2020. I think that number is lowballing that for a couple of reasons, but it's not wrong to say that we're sort of orders of magnitude off of where we need to be. But folks on this panel are doing a lot of really interesting, exciting work to change that as quickly as possible. So I'm excited for you to get to hear from them. Like I said, Shawn's going to go first, but I think before we turn it over to Shawn, if we could maybe launch our first poll question. What is the most important lever your utility can do to drive heat pump adoption? Give it a couple minutes here, and once I see some good answers, I will go ahead and end the poll.
Wow.
Can you all see that, the results?
Yes, I can.
I'm just not positive if the audience can see them. I hope they can. In case the audience can't see them, it's a pretty even split between all these different options. So I don't know if that gives you a lot of help, Shawn, but it's a pretty even split.
Well, it plays well into one of my slides. All right. Well, thank you, Meg. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking a bit about the utility perspective, and that the utility perspective from an MLP, a municipal light department. Reading is the largest, depending somewhat how you count, of a municipality, but so small compared to the traditional IOUs. But I want to talk a bit about how we came about this program and kind of our strategy and how we're doing so far. Next slide, please. So RMLD about 2 years ago really sat down to start to develop what we call an electrification strategy. And it really, the impetus for this really came from both internally and externally. Meg touched on this when she talked about the Massachusetts Clean Climate Law, which was passed earlier this year, which set some very explicit net carbon goals. And as she said, to be 100% by 2050 and by 2030 at 50%. And also based on what she was saying, we have a ways to go. So this is certainly something that is going to be driving our RMLD strategy from a regulatory point of view. But we also started looking at it from an internal kind of resource point of view about what we want our supply side to look like and where we kind of want to grow our business in terms of what activities we're doing in the marketplace. And we really have taken on a kind of a decarbonization strategy where any of our new electrification strategies that we're doing will be offset by renewable resources. So if you take those two components and then put in, well, now we're going to talk about heat pumps in particular, but the development of the technological development, and Dana will touch on this later, it really has changed a lot. Heat pumps have been around for, many years, but the types of technology advancements have made them much more applicable to the cold climate region that we serve, to New England in particular. And so all of those kind of coalesce into really driving certainly our heat pump program, but then these other factors in terms of driving our electrification strategy. Next slide, please. So when we sat down to say, what is it that we're going to need for a successful heat pump program? And I'll talk about what that really means. Really, it was kind of a three-prong approach, and none of these are really new, and they really apply to all programs. But what's a little bit different with the heat pump is how we went about each of these components. We're going to need to have strong contractor engagement. We need customer awareness of the technology and education, because even though it's been around, as I said, it's still not a common technology for many, many homeowners. So there's an awareness part. And then we, as a utility, need to step in and provide kind of putting all of this together, and also making sure that we're providing cost-effective financial incentives into the marketplace to help drive this. Next slide, please. So here's my my cement mixer story. To really make this program stand on its own, we have to take these three factors: the contractor engagement, customer engagement, and program staff. And we really need to make sure that we develop very specific targeted strategies for our heat pump program. With respect to the contractor engagement, we really needed to do a very broad and, I'll say, technical outreach to this part of the marketplace. In New England, we have been traditionally fossil fuels for heating. Many of the contractors, hey, we put in an oil furnace the last time, you need a new furnace, we're going to do it again. So we had to really engage the contractor community to make them aware of the technology, make them understand how it could be applied to the customers, and try to help them make it easier, if you will, on their sales process and installation. So we developed a whole network of what we call participating contractors, so that we have some input into guiding their knowledge, awareness about the program, but also so that customers know, hey, here's a list of contractors that we can reach out to. We also needed to make customers aware of heat pumps. This is something that many customers are really unaware of how that worked. They had heard things maybe in the previous versions where they really, they weren't, they're not going to serve the space well in a cold climate. So we did a series of open houses. We did some Heat Pump 101 seminars, a lot of direct mail, a lot of outreach to our customers on heat pumps. And then the last piece is how do we go about actually executing the program? And that's going to need not just somebody to administer the paperwork, if you will, the rebates, but also to provide the technical assistance to both contractors and customers throughout this process. And I think that's the component that really made our program unique, certainly for us. And Travis is going to talk about it in the broader landscape of Massachusetts. Next slide, please. So now we got to take the deep dive. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get the education to customers, contractors, things like that? So what we did is we kind of visualized this as three key parts of the program. One is before they participate, a customer participates. One is before it's installed, once they made their decision, and then after it's installed. And many customers, they go out, they get different bids for different types of designs of heat pumps for their home, and really need some assistance in helping to understand what is appropriate for my home, what's going to serve my heating and my cooling conditioning needs for that. And so part of our program, and this is where we partnered with Adobe in delivering this program, is having a dedicated heat pump specialist that customers can contact, ask questions, try to assess. They don't recommend a specific installation, but just help the customer understand the differences between them. And then once the customer decides, okay, I'm going to go with contractor A, I'm going to install it. What we want to make sure is that now that it's moving to the installation phase, that particular system is sized appropriately, designed appropriately. So at the end of the day, the customer is happy with how it's performing for their home. So again, we kind of extend upon this heat pump specialist role to have, prior to installation, the installation technology and specifics have to be reviewed by RMLD and our partner Abode before it occurs. And this helps us to alleviate, problems down the line in terms of sizing, performance, things like that. And then afterwards, what we want to go back and make sure before we go through any of the traditional, if you will, utility rebate process, to make sure that what the contractor did install for the customer is what was expected, is what was approved, and that it complies with the program requirements for RMLD, the efficiencies and things like that. And as well as we rely heavily on kind of the NEEP standards in terms of efficiencies and performance for these systems. And then the final piece is to check in with the customer and see, are they happy? Did things go well? Their interaction with RMLD or with the contractors, how did things like that go? So again, we kind of ended up building our program on those three things. So how did we do? Well, I spent the first part of my career as a forecaster, and I'll be the first one to tell you that I did not predict how many heat pumps we would actually get in our program, which is a great thing. From a carbon perspective, from electrification, environmental, and all of those things. Our program began last April of 2020. So we've been about a year and a half. Last year, we did 93 customers for about 280,000 in incentives. This year, this was at the end of October, and we're still getting them in. Probably end up the year with about 250, 260, but so far we've paid out over $500,000 in incentives for this year. So we've been really pleased. The feedback from customers and contractors have been very positive. It's one of those things, it's a work in progress. You're always going to be out there trying to make it smoother for customers and contractors in the marketplace while still striving for those, environmental carbon goals, things like that. And it's interesting to see this poll, and it really did come out split between incentives for homeowners, contractors, education, and technical assistance. And really all four of those for this type of program really are kind of an equal footing in my mind, because if you don't do one of those, you're going to have an issue. Not so much maybe with incentivizing contractors, and we can use that whether it's monetary or just engaging them to see that this type of program is going to make their business, an easier process, things like that. So, so it's been a fun year and a half and seeing how this has evolved. And so I'm going to turn this over to Travis, who's going to talk about kind of the consulting point of view of this.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn.
Travis, maybe before
yeah.
you jump in, if we can launch our second poll.
Definitely, that'd be great.
And I think it looks like you all can see it here, but the biggest barrier to heat pump adoption is customers don't understand the heat pump technology, upfront costs are too high, contractors continue to promote fossil fuel systems over heat pumps, and homeowners don't think they'll work in cold climates, especially relevant to us here in this part of the country. All right, got some pretty good participation, so we'll share the results. It sounded like it last time everyone could see it. Still a pretty even split with a slight edge for contractors continuing to promote fossil fuel systems and upfront costs. But I think once again, we're seeing this challenge with heat pumps is sort of many faceted. So Travis, with that, why don't you talk about how you're tackling some of those facets?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. So again, my name is Travis Estes with Adobe Energy Management. We're a Massachusetts-based energy consulting firm working with utilities throughout the region, both on energy efficiency, thermal improvements, as well as technologies around decarbonization and heat pumps. If you want to go ahead and go to the first slide for me, that'd be great. So a couple of things to note. I'm a hobbyist photographer. And so when I look at something, I like to do a few things. One, take a view of the landscape, zoom out, and then zoom back in. So that's what we're going to do in this conversation. We started this kind of thought process back in early 2020 after working closely on a lot of our energy efficiency programs, and then actually doing a program with Mass Clean Energy Center around residential new construction around these heating and cooling technologies, and really understanding what were the barriers for folks not adopting them. And we kind of came out of that experience with like just this huge question that just really plagued us, which is like, why weren't more people really adopting these systems? Like, they just made sense on so many levels. Like, what were the problems? And with that in mind, we kind of zoomed out for a moment and we started looking at what we knew, our experience as contractors ourselves, what we knew then wearing the hat of administrators of efficiency programs, and then also just thinking about like the technology and the misconceptions that were out there. And we kind of settled on this idea that there were three primary strategies that needed to be addressed to move the market. And Shawn really touched on those throughout her presentation. One was that engagement with the customer. Folks, were oftentimes feeling overwhelmed and had a lot of misconceptions, and they just needed somebody to help them throughout the process, which happened to be one of the, on the poll results for the first poll, one of the things that people said they needed the most was customers need support throughout the process. We also realized that the contractors really needed a lot of support. So in this second poll, contractors continuing to promote fossil fuels. There are a lot of really well-intentioned contractors out there, but they still don't fully understand the utility incentives. They don't know how to use them. They also don't necessarily understand where the technology is at or the best practices. And then finally, thinking about focusing on what matters. One of the other options there, or one of the comments in the chat, was someone noted that for the EcoBlock group, they really mattered about the contractor that somebody chose at the end of the day, because the contractor can make a huge difference on the success or failure of these projects. And so we really wanted to take a novel approach to our quality assurance that we were providing for clients like RMLD, where we didn't necessarily focus just on the back end of a project to make sure that there was an equipment eligibility, but we wanted to be interjected in the beginning when that project was scoped out, so that we could really get ahead of issues and challenges before the system was installed, which is a big goal of ours. So that's our big zoom out. And now let's start to zoom back in here for a moment. In 2020, we started exploring this in Q2, literally right as the world was shutting down with COVID. We had our first virtual meeting on April 1st, where we met with a number of MLPs throughout Massachusetts to talk about this concept and idea. And then by Q3, we had started signing contracts and beginning work. In Q4, here we are starting to build our contractor network, the participating contractor list that Shawn had referenced. And then fast forward now, here we are, Q4 2021. We've conducted around 1,400 consultations with residents and contractors. As part of our QA, we reviewed around $9 million in projects, and we're currently serving 15 communities with this type of program. So, what we're learning now is, or what we're seeing now is we have to continue to learn and refine. So if we can go to that next slide, please. Working with these customers, you can see kind of the ramp up of our engagements with them. And a lot of what we anticipated at the beginning was that the customers were on the front end going to need a lot of engagement and questions answered. At the end of the day, people don't want to look dumb. They don't want to make a decision that they feel foolish about. And so, especially when it's an expensive decision like this. And so we really anticipated that a lot of customers would come to us at the beginning, get some support, kind of say, all right, what do these heat pumps actually do? Is it a good fit for my home? And then we could point them in the direction of some participating contractors that had gone through the vetting process, and they'd be on their way. And kind of what we're learning and what we're seeing now is that customers want to come back to us and they want that continued support. They need that engagement. And so in this particular instance, this customer, Alyssa, had noted that she brought back quotes to us and said, can you help us with these quotes? Can we need to understand kind of what's going on? How do we dissect these? Can you go to the next slide, Nick? And so with that in mind, we pivoted and continued to expand. So we've gone now from providing these upfront kind of consultations with being a resource throughout the process to really helping dive in and helping folks understand the complexity of these quotes. This is not a knock on the contractor industry. This is a legacy challenge where you have a variety of different skill sets and where folks are at on kind of just the professionalism of their organizations. But we see a very significant degree of difference between the quotes that you can get from one contractor to the next. And as such, it makes it really difficult for a customer to make a decision at the end of the day. And with that in mind, we said, all right, how can we help customers feel comfortable with the quotes that they have, really try to understand them, see if they meet their needs, and then feel really excited and motivated to want to move forward with that project. And so that's where we have since really focused a lot of our effort into taking that concept and blowing it out. So if we can go to the next slide. So where we're at right now is in the early phases of actually rolling out a quote comparison tool for residents. And the idea here is that someone gets a couple of quotes and they send them to us. And as part of these utility programs, we can then do the kind of due diligence for them. We have access to all the right databases. We've built the right models on the back end, so we can quickly do this type of analysis and a report for a resident to say, here's an idea of kind of what you're looking at. Now, one thing that you'll notice that like a lot of folks, when you look at a quote, it says you're getting an outdoor unit and some indoor units, maybe 2 or 3, but you don't really conceptually know what that is. So we're really trying to take a lesson from the behavioral science folks and from the community-based social marketing and trying to understand here, how can we really help people get clarity into what they're getting and have kind of context about how it compares with other things as well. And so with these types of reports, our goal is to really give folks that kind of full transparency around what they're receiving, the cost, and how it actually compares like on a cost per ton basis, as well as how it's going to perform compared to what they have right now. We anticipate that this will continue to expand with additional context, helping folks know when does it matter to get a manual J, or when is it okay just to rely on what the kind of contractors provided. Are you getting more with these prices? And so some instances you might see a higher cost per ton, but in reality, the contractors also rolled in electrical upgrades as well as part of your overall scope. And so those types of things help people make a decision, because I've seen many customers have a really good quote that had a price at the top that just seemed much higher than everybody else's. But at the end of the day, it really was the best opportunity. It met their needs, it made the right level of improvements, and ultimately would help serve them in the long run the best. And so we don't want people to jump to the cheapest cost. We don't want people to be scared of things that cost more on paper. We want to help contextualize that at the end of the day. You can go to the next slide. And, continuing down this thread, contractors, some of them like this and some of them hate it. And, one of the things that we're finding here as we've built out this participating contractor list with our different communities is that the contractors that are good, the contractors that get this, that understand the why behind what we're doing, have really leaned into it. They talk about this with their clients as part of their sales pitch to say, hey, we are part of your community's participating contractor list. We aim to make it inclusive. Our goal is not to have a participating contractor list that elbows out a bunch of other contractors. We want them to come to this because this is our opportunity to build positive relationships with the contractors out of the gate. I used to be a teacher in my first career, and one of the things that I learned early on was that I wanted to get to know my students before something went wrong. I didn't want my first engagement with them or with their parents to be that time when either they bombed a test or forgot their homework or something was not going as it should. It's a lot easier to deal with those challenges, which in construction, which don't forget, like this is construction we're talking about. Retrofitting homes with heat pumps is a serious endeavor for a lot of folks. Things happen and it's not always the contractor's fault, but we wanted to make sure that we built positive relationships with these contractors so we could be an ally of theirs in making their customers happy and in helping the utilities reach their goals. The other part of this too is our kind of carrot and stick approach, which Shawn had noted. Our approach to quality assurance, I think, is one that is unique in that it does have what could be perceived as an onerous first step of that pre-approval. But right now, out of all the systems that we've reviewed, our average time to approve and review a project is 1.6 days. We're staying on top of this because we know that this matters to contractors. Contractors running into any type of barrier or delay in the process is a big burden, and we don't want to impose an additional burden on them. And so we are definitely committed to making sure that if we are going to require these additional review steps, we have to do so in a way that respects their business practice and respects their customers and their goals at the end of the day. Beyond that, focusing on what matters, which is a mantra of ours for our virtual quality assurance. We've built out an online portal for the contractors to document both through photos and attestations what's going on during that install. So we're now saving the customer the burden of having another person come out and inspect this project. We're able to get the insight that we need. And if there are any questions, we can follow up if we need to. But 99% of the time, these types of virtual QAs give us that insight to feel confident on signing off on a project, which is just better for everybody at the end of the day. And then finally, those customer surveys are huge. We get so many great insights into contractors, and all these different components add up to one of the ways that we hold contractors accountable at the end of the day. If we have contractors that are not meeting kind of our expectations of customer service, if they aren't abiding by kind of the sizing and design best practices that Shawn had alluded to earlier, those are opportunities for us to engage with them, ideally help them overcome that. But if they don't, then we can remove them from the participating contractor list. That doesn't mean they can't participate in the program and actually help their customers get rebates, but that does mean that when I'm talking to somebody, when my team is talking to somebody in the community, they're not going to say, here's a list of contractors you can start with. You don't have to use these, but just as a starting point, their name's not going to be on there and they're going to lose that opportunity. And these are good leads because these contracts or these customers that come to these contractors through this vehicle, they are folks that are excited and motivated and ready to make a decision at the end of the day. I thought you were elbowing me off the screen there, Meg. And so my last comment here again about the contractors, because I think it's so important, having been one myself, is that if you're running a utility program like this or any type of program, you have to respect what they're trying to do as running a small business. I mean, we cannot meet our climate goals without these small businesses. They are 100% essential. We just have to be there to help build them, to support them, and just continue to recognize that their goals and our goals, they're the same. We want to see more customers installing heat pumps and being happy with them at the end of the day. So to us, it's clear that contractors play a major role, just like customer education and support does. And our goal is to continue to collaborate with partners, utilities, and others to help build this support matrix that makes this all possible. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Megan for Dana. Thanks.
Thanks, Travis. And again, before we have Dana go ahead and share his presentation, why don't we launch poll 3? What is the most important technology advancement needed to advance adoption of heat pumps? Our choices are increased efficiency in lower temperatures, smaller room units, and integration with water systems.
That's fantastic.
So I would imagine the results are sort of vary by region of where you're coming from. I think New England, we do have more hydronic water systems than other parts of the country. But I think you can all see the results here. The clearest answer was increased efficiency in lower temperatures. So this one we did have a clear winner to sort of continue to improve the fundamentals. Dana, I'll turn it over to you and just let me know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Meg. so really great to be a part of this panel. Just great group of extremely knowledgeable folks on board. And I know in looking through a lot of the participants in this conference all around the country, lots of great expertise in different roles related to energy efficiency. I have been with Mitsubishi Electric for about 4.5 years. But prior to that, I was at Efficiency Maine as a program manager for the residential rebate programs, and I also set up the loan programs, a lot of it stemming back to the days of ARA. So I've helped kind of stimulate a lot of program activity and uptake of all different kinds of energy efficiency measures, weatherization, conventional heating systems, heat pumps, and solar as well. And so I've got a few different things under my belt for how to motivate the marketplace and build on these trends and things that are happening. And so before I go on with my slide deck, I have to say that the poll is fascinating. Increased efficiency at lower temperatures. Mitsubishi has products that provide 100% of their heating capacity at -5 degrees, and our hyperheat products oftentimes provide 80 or even 90% of their heating capacity, even at -13. I heat my home, I'm here in Maine, I heat my home entirely with heat pumps. And I know contractors in far distant northern Maine that haven't used any fossil fuels in several years. And so, I know that everybody's like, oh my gosh, we see it in the chat box. Oh, people can't use heat pumps for all their heat. That's crazy. And I just look at it and I'm like, really? We have it, and not just with Mitsubishi. There are other manufacturers that have good performance products at cold temperatures as well. And so the technology is here right now. It is not difficult to displace all of your heating load. I mean, like, it could be a crazy leaky barn and it would still be fine. It's all about the appropriate application of the technology and trying to, make sure you're getting the right fit. You don't want something oversized. You want to make sure that you're selecting equipment that's totally appropriate for your load. And so a manual J is right on the money to try and get in that right box. And sort of like generally for every tank of oil that you consume, for most states in sort of heating climate, for every tank of oil or equivalent amount of natural gas or heating oil, 275 gallons of oil thereabouts, it's something like a peak load of 20,000 BTUs. And so that's a crazy backward model into the appropriate sizing, but just to give people an idea about that. Meg, why don't we get started with the first slide? Okay, so I've been parading this slide around for a few different years here, really to just kind of emphasize the trajectory that we're on and what's possible for the uptake of air source heat pumps. And I saw a bunch of chat questions about ground source heat pumps. Ground source are great, but they are, as mentioned in the comments, exceedingly expensive and really out of reach for most homes, $50,000, $70,000, $80,000, and requires drilling and everything else. We're not talking about ground source heat pumps. We're talking about air source heat pumps that extract heat from outdoor air temperatures, even when it's frigidly cold, using a refrigerant that has a boiling point of -50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then using electricity to move that heat from outdoors and blow it into your living room and heat your sofa and your sheetrock and your cat. And this technology has been around for a long time. It showed up in Europe and Scandinavia even. Of course, it was in Japan prior to that, but it showed up in Scandinavia in the early 2000s. And in Norway, they primarily, more than 50% of the housing was using electric resistance because they've got a lot of hydro. And so when heat pumps showed up, it was a great way to reduce your electric consumption and provide your heating. And so over the course of a dozen years, 1 million homes installed heat pumps for heating. And, I was looking at the slide, I was like, boy, I really got to update it. Meg, next slide, please. And so I went to the Norwegian website and, hit Google Translate, and voila, I learned a bunch of new words here. I can't really pronounce them. I won't even try, but I got a bunch of the translations figured out. And so if you look at this slide, I've superimposed what the prior slide showed for the beginning from 2001 when air source heat pumps first showed up in Norway. And you can see the blue line is the trend of total sales. And then the green line kind of breaks out reflective of the black line. The black line is number of replacement units. So, heat pumps last something like 12 years. And so you see this lag of a replacement cycle of units that were installed in this first sort of surge. Okay. And so here we are today in this chart is from, the end of 2020. And so you can see that in Norway, they're still at an install rate of approaching 100,000 units. Now, Norway is is relatively similar in size to Massachusetts. It's 4 times the population and number of households as Maine or New Hampshire, and 8 times that of Vermont. And so I superimposed, not only did I superimpose the early part of that chart, but I also put in some trend lines that are reflective of the install rate in New England. And so this gold line with the gold and red diamonds, that is in fact the rebates offered through Efficiency Maine for heat pumps. They recently announced that more than, since they started offering heat pump incentives, they've had more than 70,000 homes participate out of something depending on how you read the tea leaves in Maine, something like 700,000 homes. So seriously, like ready to cross the threshold of 10% of homes in Maine having heat pumps, starting from none. I mean, 0.1% of homes having central air conditioning, but not cold climate heat pumps prior to 2010, 11, 12, something like that. So we've had this dramatic increase, and that increase has been exponential in the past year. And honestly, Vermont has been right there with Maine in the uptake of heat pumps, although they've used an entirely different strategy. Maine has been, issuing rebates directly to the consumers and communicating to consumers, creating demand, pulling that demand forward, and then having contractors, and then pushing with the contractors and requiring training and quality assurance, much like Travis outlined. Now, that when you and I can feel it, when contractors are like, people are like, oh, the contractors, they're recommending fossil fuel stuff. Some people are going to convert just from talking to them, and some people are going to convert because they're seeing a missed opportunity. And so in Maine, the top 20 installers of heat pumps out of something like 700 that are signed up with the state, they probably install about 50% of all the systems in the state, something like 10,000 units per year out of that top 20 companies. And I think that that's really what happens, is that you get a couple of superstars, and then other contractors sort of say, gee whiz, they're not having to deal with oil, they don't have any burning things, their customers are super happy, they're taking care of homes, and they're getting all these rebates, and they're building their businesses, they're growing faster than anybody else. And so it's sort of like, I'm going to do more of that because it seems to be profitable. That kind of trend happens, and that's what contributes to the overall growth. Now, Massachusetts and New York are both working feverishly hard to increase volume. And I think that, Meg is right. The numbers shown in the press of around 500 whole homes is not at all reflective of what's going on in the state. There's a lot of systems that are being installed all across Massachusetts, probably only at around the 20 to 25,000 home range per year. And those are somewhat not necessarily whole home. A lot of people will still keep their existing heating system and then use the heat pump to some degree and then switch over because they don't know to just push the heat pump hard and it'll deliver all winter long. Or maybe they do that and it's a few years down the road before they feel enough comfort and security to remove their existing heating system, and then they tell all their friends, oh, guess what, I didn't use any oil last year. Or natural gas or propane. So, or it turned my, occupation of feeding the wood stove into a hobby, that sort of thing. So I'm anticipating that Massachusetts and New York, with some of the incredibly robust rebates and simplification of the programs that has been engaged in as of late, we'll see some dramatic increases in the rate of uptake across the state. Next slide, please. But there are other factors that affect the rate of installations across the country. One of them that we've had to face as an industry recently has been just the craziness in the supply chain. This is true across all the different manufacturers, but there are ships that are off the board, and there are trucks just picking up the loads as quickly as they can, but still, even right now, at this very minute, for every 10, for every single truck out there going to pick up loads, there's 10 loads waiting for it, literally, at these shipping ports with containers. And so, it's going to take a while before this gets straightened out. We're going to continue to have some limitations and constraint. That being said, the marketplace in the last year has grown probably more than 25% of product actually shipped and given to contractors. So word is getting out. We're seeing an increase in sales all across the country, but particularly in the Northeast and the Northwest. And we're going to see that continue. Next slide, please. So I could talk all afternoon, and I wish we all had a chance to sit around and chat about this more, but I really want to focus on motivations. So I've got 3 slides: consumer motivations, contractor motivations, and distributor motivations. And they're really important for program administrators and people that are, trying to write these rules to drive these programs to understand. You don't have to worry about the things that people are going to be self-motivated for in the market. So, when you're driving your programs and creating programs, keep it simple, keep it relatively rich, give them an actual incentive to make these steps and understand their motivations. Consumers want to save money. They want to do things that are going to improve their comfort. These are like emotional things. They're not necessarily rational, but having good messaging around, yes, heat pumps can do this for you. Don't worry about it. Just call to action. Get a contractor to come in and look at your system. Get somebody who installs heat pumps every single day. You're going to get the best price. You're going to get the most uniform quality, and they're going to do it the fastest. You just get that all through the guys that do heat pumps all the time. And then in terms of barriers, this is where the messaging from the program comes into play. People are concerned about the upfront cost. Well, that's where the incentives and financing really come into play. Aesthetics is the kind of thing that people get over. There's a lot of concern about having something on the wall. About 3 weeks later, people don't even see it. Okay, next slide, please, Nick. Okay, so then for contractor motivations, they are motivated by profit. They want to sell systems. They don't want to have any callbacks from customers on, the size of the system or the not being comfortable or heating or anything else. And that has traditionally driven contractors to oversize systems. And with conventional heating systems, when you oversize it, and you don't get great, fuel efficiency out of it, and it cycles a lot, but it doesn't really impact the comfort nearly as much as if you undersize it dramatically and, it's really cold. So like with heat pumps, it's important not to oversize them dramatically. And like when I say oversize, I mean like 200%. That is pretty common that a contractor that doesn't understand heat pumps will put in a massive system because he's concerned it's not going to work when it's cold. They're going to be much better off. Consumers are going to be much better off with smaller systems and multiple outdoor units in order to accommodate all the different kinds of loads that they're going to have across the season. That's an important message and part of all the training that all the manufacturers do, but also through our distributors and partners like Adobe. So the other thing is that programs really need to allow for some latitude in how they interact with contractors, making sure that they understand the program, or if there's a problem in in a particular installation, that they communicate that thing, but unless it's actually a true hazard, they're not having the contractor come back and remedy it. Just say, we're noting this, we want you to change this, please change this in future installations. Or if it's really something that needs to be addressed right away, to come back to that one install. But programs really have to look at contractors as partners to accomplishing this great task. If a program is too onerous on contractors, they're inclined to say, whoa, I'm out. It's just not worth my hassle. I've got plenty of work to do. There's not enough contractors. I can get people to pay me for all kinds of things that don't involve paperwork. So it's really those kind of hurdles and burdens, or requiring contractors to spend time doing spreadsheets or any of the rest of that. Forget it. We want contractors in vans, going to homes, installing systems. Don't make them do things that are not part of their normal operations. Next slide, please. Okay. And so
Dana, just FYI, if
Yep.
you could wrap up, because we're getting at time and I want people to get a chance to go to breakout
will.
rooms and really talk to you guys about it. So
That's awesome. Thank you. So here we are. Distributor motivations are really quite the same. Just understand that distributors are ordering as much product as they possibly can right now, and they're just facing these extremely long delays. If a distributor orders product right now, today, to respond to program changes, it's likely going to be April or May before they would see that product. That's the reality of the supply chain right now. Is it's easily 6 months before you're going to see product. And so just understand that they don't really need any motivation to get more product. They're trying to get it as quickly as they can, but they also really don't want to deal with a whole bunch of paperwork or rules. So with that, thank you. I think that's my last slide. And I look forward to any questions or further conversation. And of course, there's my email and phone number. Feel free to reach out to me with any sort of conversation that you'd like.